brilliant moment now to move to an example of a university doing really interesting and expert work in community engagement that's informing the civic agreement and the civic strategy, but also has very sort of deep roots and has been developing over a number of years. So I'm delighted to introduce Nick, who's going to talk to us about the approach that's been taken at Staffordshire University.
Morning everyone, and thanks Paul and Emily and the team for inviting me along this morning. My name's Nick Grattan. I work at Staffordshire University, and my role is lead for civic engagement and evaluation. And that kind of it hits all the boxes for me. I am engaged with communities through my work. I spend a lot of time talking to communities. I do a lot of participatory action research, which is where some of the learning from that I'm going to talk to you about today has come from. But I think crucially, my background as well is in youth work and in community development work, and so some of these principles that I'm going to be talking to you about, I think they aren't just necessarily for a university setting, they're much broader than that, and being able to understand that context of community development and how what we're trying to achieve at Staffordshire University fits within those broader principles, as Emily kind of outlined earlier, I think has been quite important for our journey. I think through my career to date, I think central to everything I've done, when I think back to when I was a part-time youth worker to the work that I do now at Staffordshire, for me it's all about participation, it's all about collective action, and being able to take control, I guess, of some of the decisions that might affect our lives. So, you know, supporting communities to do that. And in my role at Staffordshire, I have a kind of overview of the civic and community strategy, and I support colleagues in developing that and also implementing that. I've also got a responsibility for participatory action research as well. I'm here today to talk about community engagement. I'm here to talk about how we find that balancing act between the needs of an organisation, in our case a university, and quite often the funders that sit behind the projects that we deliver, and the needs of the community. And so I'm talking about the things that are really close to my heart. My work with community researchers sits at the heart of this, and also it's quite, what I'm going to present to you today is quite practical. I'm going to be talking about practical actions that our community researchers have said we need to embed into our work if we're going to do this in an appropriate way. So just a little bit of context then. I've mentioned participatory action research. The model that we use at Staffordshire University we call Get Talking. It supports communities to get involved in research, both within their own communities and their own projects, but also in university research as well. And we've used this in we've used many examples of this previously, from large arts projects such as Appetite, which is the top left-hand corner picture there. We've worked with Staffordshire Fire and Rescue Service to develop their children and young people strategy using this approach, so supporting them to reach out to communities. We've worked with Reach, which is the centre picture, which is an advocacy service for people with learning disabilities, to help them talk to the cultural sector about their needs in relation to accessing arts and culture. And that links again to our City of Culture bid up in the top right-hand corner there of the slides. And I've also worked with Vintage Volunteers to help them support other older volunteers and to think about the things that might get in the way of other people engaging in volunteering later in life. What the project that I'm going to talk to you about today, or the learning from the project today, I'm not going to go into any depth about the project, but we were lucky enough last year to receive UKRI Enhancing Partnerships for Place-Based Engagement funding, and we developed a project called Keep Talking, and we worked with our partners Expert Citizen CIC to develop this project. It came out of a previous project around hardship and poverty, that we worked with over 40 community researchers to be involved in that piece of work. But Keep Talking gave us a real opportunity to delve deeply into some of these issues around what community researchers need from us as a university and from a community organisation. And it really helped us understand how we engage with communities and the things that people need from us in order to engage with us as a university in particular. We work with a community research team, so here's different members of our team here, and as you can see, we started off delivering this project really face to face. We had lots of meetings face to face. We huddled around post-it notes back in the olden days, and we developed work together. And then halfway through the project, the global pandemic hit, and we had to adapt that online. I think that shift online actually really made us reflect on those community engagement techniques that we'd relied on quite heavily, and it also offered an opportunity for us to open up that discussion with the community researchers around what they needed from us in that ongoing engagement through the pandemic. So the research covered lots of different areas. It was very much focused on how do we develop sustainable community research, and a lot of that focused on the needs of the community researchers, what they needed from us as a university, what they needed from the community organisation. We also had lots of conversations about power and ethics, and not only the issues that arose around those, but also some of the solutions that we could implement that might overcome that. And lots of what I'm going to talk to you today about kind of draws on that really, and draws on those conversations. So I'm going to talk to you about three main areas that can pose issues for community researchers. There will be hundreds of others that came up. I've just picked out these three for today, and then also then present some of the solutions to those. So some of the things that the community researchers told us that they needed from us, but then also some of the thinking and learning that we've generated ourselves around that too. So I think what we need to think of is this balancing act, really. We've got the needs of the community on the right hand side there, but we've also then got the needs of the researcher in our case, or the university if we're thinking about our kind of wider civic engagement, or it might even be a facilitator of a group, for example. But we need to be able to balance out these two sometimes competing needs and agendas, not always competing. One of the things that kind of can get in the way of that, and I think Emily's comment about engagement in and versus engagement with or engagement for, quite often we have a piece of work that we need to do, and we need or we want the community to be engaged in that. And what that can do immediately is, because that's our agenda, because that's our university agenda, that can immediately kind of tip the balance. So it puts the agenda, it puts the power in the university's favour. So what I thought might be helpful then is to think about how we can redress that balance a little bit by focusing on community needs in relation to this. So if we think about these things that I'm going to talk through some examples of how we've done that. But I think first of all, thinking about the purpose of the engagement is hugely important. Focusing on relationships, thinking about creativity and flexibility, and then thinking about the small details sometimes as well. So the first question then I think everybody needs to be asking themselves is why? Why are we asking communities to be involved in that, in this particular piece of work? Why is it important for us to be engaged in communities in a piece of work that they actually want to drive? Why should we actually be part of that? So that focus, I think, on the question why, what's the purpose of our work and our practice is really important. Because if we don't ask ourselves this question, our community researchers told us that actually sometimes they can feel exploited, they can feel used, and it doesn't really it doesn't put things in our favour really if we're starting off on that wrong foot. So thinking really carefully at the start about why we're asking for community engagement will help us in develop those long-term relationships. The second area then is, as I've just said, developing relationships. Now, we talk quite a bit about the importance of the relationship between communities and universities, or community partners and universities. And we think I've spent many years kind of trying to work on those relationships, build those up, strengthen them. And I think, again, Emily mentioned earlier about long-term engagement, and I think that's something that we try to develop with our community partners. It's really easy when funding potentially is quite short term that we engage with a partner or we engage with a particular community, and then with all the will in the world, it's really difficult then to maintain that relationship. What we're working at really hard at Staffs is developing those longer term relationships and really thinking about a longer term vision for those. So those are really important, those community and university relationships. But equally, one of the things that we found with Keep Talking was that the relationships within the group were just as important. And so the group that we pulled together, they didn't necessarily know each other particularly well at the start of the project, but that group formed a really nice support group for each other, especially during the pandemic. And I'll talk to you later about how we engaged that group and kept them together. But relationships, I think, is key to any kind of form of community engagement. There's just a few quotes there around the impact of those friendships as well. And I think for people particularly with lived experience of things like mental ill health or as alternative lifestyle, as one of our community researchers said here, it really does help to finding that friendship within the group was an added bonus, I think, for them. So I think that's really important to note. The other thing as well when we're thinking about community engagement is how can we embed creativity and make it a multi-dimensional form of engagement. Instead of just a one-off, let's come together and have a Zoom meeting. Let's think creatively about how we can engage people. And some of the things that we did with Keep Talking, I mean, the pandemic and moving into lockdown meant that we couldn't necessarily rely on everybody having digital access. And so we had to think quite creatively about how we engaged all members of the group in an equal way. And so some of the things that we did with that, we took photographs. We asked people to take photos of the daily walks when we were allowed out for an hour each day. People shared recipes quite a bit, and we actually developed a recipe book at the end of it. So we've got a lockdown recipe book that came as one of our research outputs then. And people were sharing crafts together. They were writing blogs and diaries, which really helped to kind of process that engagement, both with the project and also through the pandemic as well. People were recording their daily walks. People were posting pictures of cats, and the WhatsApp group actually that we developed was a really good way of us keeping in contact with each other. I mean, there are issues around kind of how we monitor that and how we engage with that, but we were quite clear about when that would be monitored and how it would be monitored, and if there was support that was needed, that would then go and be picked up elsewhere. But that group helped to connect not only the organisation, the university and the community research teams, but also connect each other, and it became quite a nice friendship group. Poetry and photography again became quite an important way of engaging. And this is a quote from one of our community researchers who said they can feel a sense of camaraderie, and actually because everybody was going through this engagement in the same way, but being able to interpret how they engage with that in different ways, actually that really helped to form that relationship again that we mentioned was quite important previously. I think one of the points I'd make is that it's all about the small details. So it was really important for us actually to maintain some of that engagement and that we'd had prior to the lockdown. And I think one of the things that we did, we had a bake and bring webinar. So it was a webinar where we were sharing our research findings, and we had people from all over the country and all over the world actually coming along to this. And prior to them arriving, we sent everybody a tea bag in the post, and also a recipe that one of the community researchers had developed. And that helped us make that connection. It made that human connection, I think, with the participants. So although we were doing things in quite an unusual at the time way, that kind of human connection, that connection that we had with our previous engagement around sitting and eating and drinking tea together, we tried to continue that, and all those small differences can actually make a real big difference. So the second thing, I need to speed up a little bit, but the second thing then that we need to think about when we're engaging in communities is power imbalance. And we know that being part of a university automatically gives us that kind of power within any situation. And I can't stress enough how important it is to acknowledge that. And our group did quite a bit of work around this and started to think about how we could address some of this power. And so there was a couple of things that we did, and I think the first thing to think about is to really think about who benefits from this work. So again, coming back to that question of at the beginning about why we're doing it and who is going to benefit, and I think we need to be honest with ourselves about that. Sometimes I've been guilty of going into projects knowing that actually it will benefit my work, but not really thinking about how it might benefit those who I'm asking to be involved. And so having that understanding at the beginning is really crucial. One of the community researchers, this is just gold dust. One of the community researchers on one of our podcasts says, if you believe you know everything, you know nothing. And that's absolutely crucial, I think. So celebrating the assets of everybody in the group and working to those strengths is really important. And a piece of work that we did with the team was around being able to map all the different assets that we'd all got and what we could all bring to that project. And again, I think recognising the expertise of the communities that we're working with is absolutely vital in developing our kind of civic and community work. Finally, there's shared ownership too, and I think this is quite tricky sometimes, especially for universities. So, we went into this project really wanting this to be an equal partnership, and so we agreed with the community researchers and with the community organisation expert citizens that we would share all of the research. So the data was shared between us, the direction of the project would be shared, and we'd all have an agreement around what that actually would look like. We shared the resources, and actually the group really drove which resources were produced, and expert citizens were really keen for us not to just write academic reports. They were really keen that the resources that we produced together and that the group produced were actually going to be meaningful for people. And for the community organisations as well, and also making sure that we've made sure that on all the reports we produce, we've named all of the community researchers as co-authors on those as well. So I think that's really important. Thanks, Paul. Finally, the other area that can pose problems we found was bureaucracy and inflexible processes within a university setting. I don't think this will be a surprise to many people, but sometimes we really struggled with things like getting people enrolled on short courses quickly and easily, getting people signed up to things like Unitemps and for payment for their time, and particularly the ethics programme. And so there's a couple of things I think that really stand out in terms of how to address some of these things. The first is a role of a connector, which I'll come on to, and second is questioning everything we do and the fundamentals of how we work. So just thinking about the connector role, first of all, we were really lucky and Keep Talking that we were able to recruit 2 complementary team members. So Staffordshire University hosted a research assistant, Expert Citizens hosted a project assistant, and the project assistant really took this connector role. So she had got previous experience of being a community researcher with us, so she kind of knew how to navigate some of those university processes from previous projects. But she'd also then, she was hosted at Expert Citizen, so she got those relationships as well with that group. And her role became really important. She played a really important pastoral role, and these are some of her posts on the WhatsApp group that she'd post all the time, just kind of keeping the group motivated and engaged, but also helping them to navigate some of those really challenging processes that are in place. That, you know, it's part of being part of a large organisation, but it doesn't. Some of those things make it a little bit more difficult for communities to be engaged with us, so really challenging some of those. And secondly then, this idea of questioning the fundamentals of how we work. And again, there are things in place that sometimes for community, things in place in universities that communities sometimes really struggle with. So during our work around the ethical challenges of being a community researcher, the things that they kind of found really sticky and difficult came this idea of getting consent from participants as a community researcher. And particularly for some of the communities, you know, the group I mentioned earlier on about the advocacy service for people with learning disabilities, that process was so challenging of providing information sheets, talking them through the research, making sure everybody understood that. And so what we did as part of Keep Talking was we really challenged that, and we went to our ethics committee at Staffordshire University and said, this is really challenging sometimes, and so we want you to think about how to change this and make it an easier process for communities to engage in with us through research. And they agreed to more flexible ways of engaging with the consent process. And so we've actually now used this new method of a kind of illustrated video a couple of times with a few different groups. So I hope what I've covered is this kind of idea that actually it's all a balancing act, and we need to think quite carefully about how we're going to respond to some of those things that may automatically be in place because we're part of this large institution, and we need to challenge ourselves over those things. And just to kind of finish off, I thought it might be helpful just to highlight some of those key areas of learning that I've talked about today. So these are on the slides, and then also to just list on the slide some of the resources that this learning's come from. I hope that was helpful.
Yes, so much to reflect on. I mean, I was lucky enough to be invited up to Staffordshire and met some of your community researchers and some of your partners in the project, and I just would really emphasize to people that those resources that Nick's talked about and the project itself are just extraordinary. And you know, you've talked a lot about the process that you went through, but you know, my reflection was the result of that process was the most impressive kind of knowledge building that really illuminated the experience of poverty and really helped inform local policy and practice and made a huge difference. I think it's just really important to remember that this work is actually makes things happen, and meeting your community researchers and also just seeing the transformational impact that working in this way had upon them as people was really moving, actually. So yeah, it's extraordinary work. It was really nice to see Kaz has just reflected and said, great insights, Nick, thank you. Could you say more about how you engage community members who might not traditionally engage in consultation, research or partnerships to ensure knowledge is equitably co-produced? A really great question from Kaz. Please, while Nick is winding up to think about how to answer that brilliant question. Any other questions or reflections in the chat would be great, or you can put your hand up. Emily, I might go to you in a second to see if you had any other thoughts. But yeah, Nick, how about Kaz's great question?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think, you know, we are in quite often in danger of always going to the same group, to, you know, hearing the same voices within that. One of the things that we did with Get Talking Hardship, which was the project before Keep Talking, was that we recruited community researchers. We had a whole array of different ways of engaging. We worked with community organisations who had those contacts, so that was a really important way of us engaging. So we weren't necessarily asking the organisations to be part of the team, but they helped us reach those community members who otherwise we weren't really in touch with. We also did some of the basics like flyers in community centres, and, you know, trying to going through those contacts and reaching out to those groups. The other thing that we did, I think, that was really helpful for Get Talking Hardship was we partnered with our local newspaper, The Sentinel. And instead of just saying, can you report on, you know, our research and what a great job we're doing, we actually partnered with them. And so they became invested in actually helping us reach people. And so they helped us reach quite a wide community research team. And in our community research team for Get Talking Hardship, we had not only those people that perhaps traditionally had been involved with us before, but so many new people had got involved in that as well. And yeah, I think the other thing that really helped too was that it was just such an important topic for people, and people were so invested in trying to take some action around this. So I think that really helped. And then, as just finally on that, the Keep Talking project, we partnered with Expert Citizens. So I don't think I mentioned, but they're a team of people with lived experience of things like homelessness and hardship and kind of substance misuse and domestic violence. So kind of the, you know, who actually, you know, had lots of they were quite skeptical about actually trying to, you know, engage with a university. It took quite a long time to build that relationship up, but I think those relationships are really, you know, just taking time over those and getting to know people for who they are is just vital.
Great. Emily, any thoughts?
I mean, I think it's just such a fantastic thing to talk through, because actually I think one of the things I was reflecting on is that quite often doing good engagement involves a lot of really small steps. You know, there's often we're under pressure in institutions, and I remember when I was in a university, we're under pressure to demonstrate that we've done, you know, we've reached so many people, or we've, you know, spoken to so many different organisations or community members. And the way that you've used examples of kind of, you know, how bring people into that conversation, little things like, you know, WhatsApp groups and icebreakers, and it's really important and stuff we mustn't forget about, I think, because actually it should encourage us that if we start small, we can get much further and actually demonstrate real impact, as Paul said. And I agree that point on the insights and what kind of conversation are you drawing everybody into at local level can be just as valuable as demonstrating anything kind of shiny or snazzy, can't it, in terms of engagement. So no, I just thought that was lovely, and a couple of reflections from me.
I think that's crucial, isn't it? Because you know, this takes on the slide just before the end where I've outlined those kind of key areas of learning. This takes so much time. You know, it isn't a quick win, and often it isn't the big shiny, you know, thing that everybody can see and promote and look how amazing this is. It takes time, and it takes that individual one-on-one relationship quite often, which is such a challenge given the pressures that we're all under. And I think that's something that I'd say about the development of the civic university agreements, really, you know, making sure that we're not forgetting about that small detail within a much bigger structure, I think is really important. Yeah.
I was just really struck by what you were saying, Nick, about actions speak louder than words. And I think that's a theme that we've definitely heard from the public engagement professionals we work with as to how they have behaved during COVID, actually, and often let go of things that were sort of priorities for them in terms of driving projects forward, and just been there and just just done things that are helpful, and just how important it is to maintain that trust and for people to feel that they can rely on you in times like this. So that really resonated.
And also making people feel and believe that they're valued. I think that's key, that they've got an important role to play as well. And I can't quite stress that kind of getting that power right. It's a challenge, but it's so important to get right, because people are skeptical quite often of working with universities. It's like, oh, well, what's in it for you? What's in it for us? So it's really important to reflect on that, to acknowledge it openly, and to address it.